Alright, I'm Matt Moore and I will be interviewing Mr. George Klein. We are at the Glenview Public Library. It is October 28th, 2009. The people in the room currently are myself, Mr. Klein, Annie Boswell, Laura Monterhawk, and Mr. Dan Rhodes. Um, Mr. Klein, were you drafted or did you enlist in the
I enlisted.
Uh, what was your reason for enlisting? Like, what was your motivation?
Well, in February of 1939, which was 2 years before, 2.5 years before the war started, I joined the Illinois National Guard. Why? Because I wanted to learn how to ride horses. So I joined the Field Artillery. That was in 1939. In 1941, in March, we were called into federal service for a year's training. And that's 10 months before World War II started, as far as we were concerned in the United States.
What branch of the service did you enlist in?
Started out in field artillery. Later in combat I was in the infantry, and I was back in the field artillery.
What was the highest rank you achieved while in the service?
While I was in active service, second lieutenant.
Where were you living at the time that you were
In Chicago.
Chicago? Did you pick your branch or did they pick it for you?
I picked my branch when I joined the National Guard.
Why did you choose to go into the Army, like versus Air Force or Navy?
Because I wanted to learn how to ride horses.
Oh, all right. Did you go through a boot camp or did they just send you straight out?
No, on Chicago Avenue in Chicago, which is no longer there. There was an armory where they kept the horses and the troops and so forth and so on. And what got me started with it was watching what they called the Black Horse Troop. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but when they had military parades, the Black Horse Troop always led the parade. And being 17 years old and very impressionable, I said, wow, wouldn't that be nice? So that's why I joined that.
When they were preparing to send you out to World War II, did you go through like a rigorous physical and mental training or no?
Well, we were called into federal service.
So that was
Before the war started. And then in December of 1941, the war started, and we were then in for the duration. So we were there. There was no question about it. Whether you were smart, not so smart, able, not so able, you were in.
Can you describe your experience before the war, like when you were at the Armory in downtown?
Oh, sure. Starting with when? How I learned how to ride a horse?
When you first showed up at the Armory?
The first thing they did was give me a uniform. And they had lace-up boots and so forth and so on, and a campaign hat. And the next thing they did was put me on a horse with no saddle, no rein, and the horses were very well trained. All they did was go around the armory in a circle. But if you ever rode a draft horse, it was about so wide, you quickly found out that it took a little bit of knowledge to make the horse do what you wanted to do rather than what the horse wanted to do.
Did you have an instructor that led you to learn how to do this with the horse, like make it move the way you wanted to?
We had corporals and sergeants and lieutenants who were in charge of the training.
Were they rough with you? Like, did they put you down, or were they kind of?
Not really.
Any other thing you would like to talk about while at the Armory in Chicago?
No, not much. It was just every week on a Monday night we'd go down there for 2 hours and either learn how to ride horses or to hook up a caisson or hook up a cannon or ride around the Armory. And then 2 weeks every summer we went up to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin for 2 weeks training.
After the breakout of the war in 1941, how long until you made it into combat?
I went over to Europe in 1943, August as I remember. And didn't go into combat until June 6th, 1944, which was what they called D-Day.
What did you do between August of 1940?
Train.
Just train?
Train.
Was it, can you elaborate on that?
Well, in May of 1942, I went to Officers Candidate School. In August, I came out as a second lieutenant, was assigned to a division in Camp Forest, Tennessee. While I was there was an opportunity to join what they called the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which I did. And we went through all kinds of training, most of it physical, hand-to-hand combat, infantry training, and whatever else was involved. While we were training, after I'd been there for about 2 months, we were climbing cliffs. We weren't climbing cliffs, we were descending cliffs. And about 20 or 15 feet from the bottom, the rope broke. The sergeant and I fell off the cliff. I broke my ankle, he broke an arm, and I went to the hospital. While I was in the hospital, the 2nd Ranger Battalion went down to Florida. And when I got out of the hospital, I was reassigned back to the 80th Division. From the 80th Division, I went over to, I said, I'm not doing anything for the war effort here, and I applied for overseas duty. I was sent to Ireland with the 5th Infantry Division, and that's where I did most of my training in Europe.
During your training in Europe, was it as rigorous as it was in Tennessee?
More so.
More so?
Yes.
Did you enjoy your time in Ireland, or?
Well, as I remember it now, yeah, it was a lot of fun. At the time, I probably wasn't too happy.
What was your first impression upon leaving the United States to fight for America?
I got on a boat, and we stopped in Iceland for 2 weeks to pick up the rest of the troops. We landed in Liverpool, England, and were immediately put on a boat and sent to a place called Kilkeel, Northern Ireland. At that time, Ireland was a beautiful country. I imagine it still is. It was green. It was green all the time.
What were your living quarters like when you were?
We were in a Quonset hut. Do you have any idea what a Quonset hut is?
No idea.
If you can imagine a cylinder that's cut in half and set on the ground. So you've got a round tent, you put a door on one end, a door on the other end, and a pot-bellied stove in the middle. And that's a Quonset hut, and that's where we were.
Did you have any other assignments besides training while you were in Ireland?
2 things. I trained as an air observer, which meant you go up in a Piper Cub and you observe artillery fire to be able to direct it where you want it to go. And the other part was just regular artillery training.
So no, cleaning out the bathrooms, or?
I was the 2nd lieutenant, and I didn't have to clean out the bathrooms.
All right, you got lucky there.
Right.
What was the path you had? Not so quite the path, but how did you get from Ireland to Normandy when you were?
I was on London and leave, and I was walking down the street in London in February of 1944, and I ran into the commanding officer of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which was the outfit that I had been with back in Tennessee. And I didn't think he would remember me, but he did. In fact, he remembered that I was the lieutenant who fell off the cliff. And he said, "How would you like to rejoin the 2nd Ranger Battalion?" And I said, "I would love it." I said, "But I have to go back to Ireland to get all my possessions and have them shipped to wherever we are." He said, "Don't worry about that. You go to our base, which was in Bude, B-U-D-E, England, and report in." He said, "Tell them you sent me, and I'll be back in 2 days, and I'll tell you what to do." So I then became a ranger again.
Was a ranger the thing that you most wanted to be? Was that a special honor for you to be welcomed back into the?
At the time, I thought so.
Can you describe the events that happened June 4th and 5th before your landing on D-Day on Normandy?
Well, we went from Bude after training for 4 months. We went to what's it called? An embarkation port, which was in Weymouth, England, and we loaded up on ships. The ship that we were in was called the Ben McCreary, I'm really not sure of the name. And we were supposed to land on the 5th of June, but the weather was so lousy and the seas were so rough that it was postponed. And it was finally settled for the 6th of June. We went across the English Channel, and we in the meantime, of course, we had been given our objectives, and we had been training for cliff climbing, because the 2nd Ranger Battalion consisted of 6 companies, plus a headquarters company. A, B, and C companies were landing on Omaha Beach, and D, E, and F, and I was in F company, were to climb the cliffs, which were in between Omaha and Utah Beach, and we were to destroy the gun emplacements at the top of the cliff that covered the approaches and covered the seaway in front. And that was our mission.
What was your impression upon, well, like on the boat ride while arriving on, in between, when you were going towards the cliff? Like, what were you thinking when you were on the boat?
Well, when we were on the boat, it was still all right. There were no problems. We checked our equipment, and so forth and so on. All of us were probably somewhat nervous, looking forward to whatever was going to happen. And at about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, we debarked from the Ben McCree, that was the name of the ship, into what they call Higgins boats, which are landing craft. And as we started to approach the beaches, then we started to take small arms fire. At that time, we began to realize very quickly that this was no longer training.
Mm-hmm. Did you happen to climb up the cliff?
I did.
What was when you first got on land, what did you first see upon arriving in the world?
The Pont du Hoc, which is where we landed, was under intense fire from the naval ships. And in the process, they had probably knocked off quite a few of the tops of the hills down into the seashore. So it was no longer like this at the bottom. It was dirt and scree that you climbed up, but we still had probably about 75 feet to go up. And the way they did that was, in each boat there was mounted a mortar with a grappling hook attached to the end of the explosive charge. That was fired up. It was supposed to hit the top of the cliff, hold on, and we had 3 or 4 men in each boat who were able to climb hand over hand on this rope up to the top. When they got up there, if they were still alive, they pulled up rope ladders, and we went up the rope ladders.
How many casualties happened because of this ascent up the cliff?
It's hard to say how many casualties, but I would say quite a few. The battalion consisted of 530 some odd men, and by the end of the 2nd day there were less than 100 who had not been wounded or killed.
Did you have any friends who were in your battalion with you? Like, did you know many of the people? Like, did you have a friendship with them?
With some of the officers, yes, and of course some of the enlisted men.
Would you say that your landing on D-Day would be one of your more memorable experiences of war?
Absolutely.
Did you get any medals for your actions on June 6th?
I did.
Which ones?
The unit got the Presidential Unit Citation, All of the Rangers received the Bronze Star. I got the Purple Heart for being wounded.
Where did you get wounded? Where, like?
At the top of the hill.
No, like on your body.
No. I had a bayonet wound in my leg.
Was it one of the most painful things you've ever experienced before?
No, not really. We were at the top of the pont. The area was covered with shell holes, and we were going from one shell hole to another, and so forth and so on. German troops were popping up from dugouts and so forth and so on, and we really didn't know who was in front of us or who was behind us. While we were in one of the shell holes, my sergeant, whose name was, I forgot, I'll think of it before this meeting is over again, yelled out, "Look out, Lieutenant." And I turned around, and here came a German soldier with a rifle and bayonet. I shot him twice. He was probably dead before he hit the ground, but his rifle and bayonet kept on coming, hit the edge of the shell hole, and hit me in the leg.
After your land on D-Day, did you experience any more combat?
Well, yes, I was there for a day and a half, and then I was sent back to England, went to the hospital, had my leg cleaned up, stitched, and so forth and so on. And a month later, I was sent back to the 5th Infantry Division, to C Company of the 46th Field Artillery, which is the outfit that I had been with in Ireland before. They were now preparing to come over to France, and they were looking for people who had had combat experience. Here I was.
Was there any other memorable thing that happened after D-Day, like, or was that the climax of your wartime experience?
Yeah, it's hard to say which was a climax because I saw a lot of combat after that.
Can you describe your combat after D-Day a little bit?
Well, it was from July until November, and I alternated between being a forward observer, which meant you go up with the assault platoon of the infantry, and you go with them, calling in artillery fire wherever it's needed or requested, and so forth and so on. And I alternated between that and being an air observer, which is flying in a Piper Cub, observing what's going on, looking for what they call targets of opportunity.
So, was there any other wartime combat-related experience you would like to talk about?
Which one would you like to hear?
All of them.
We have how long did you say?
Got 2,000 minutes
2,000 minutes. All I can do is, I can either walk you through the whole thing, or I can pick out individual things and so forth.
Whichever one you'd prefer.
We landed on the 10th of July and relieved units of the 1st Infantry Division in a little town called, this is not my French pronunciation, it's what I called it, that Haute de Valère, which was a little hamlet sitting up on top of a hill. And nothing was happening at that point in time because everything was static. We were still bringing troops in SOAR, bringing material and so forth. In late July, they had what they called the breakout, where we broke up. We went from the beachhead into France. And our first target was a town called Angers, which was the beginning of the Loire Valley. At this time, we were again alternating between being a forward observer and being an air observer. We took Angers without too much trouble. We had one sharp battle in a town called Avranches, where the Germans mounted a counterattack, but it was repulsed by the infantry. And if you know anything about the history of World War II from July through the end of August, I would say, the German army was in complete disarray. They had practically no air force, and they were disorganized. So what would happen is we would go maybe 40 or 50 miles in a day. There may have been 1 or 2 skirmishes or battles and so forth and so on. And we went from Angers to Chartres, to Reims, to Verdun, to Montereau, and in September, as we came to the Moselle River, the Third Army, which was headed by General Patton, ran out of gas, ran out of ammunition, and we came to the river and basically stopped. At that point in time, we probably could have crossed the river because there were no Germans in the town of Metz. But while we were being engineered or whatever with ammunition and so forth and so on, the Germans moved back in. I forget the name of the town, but on the way, I was being an air observer, and we were flying over areas where we did not have complete control. All of a sudden, my pilot, who was a fellow by the name of, he was a first lieutenant by the name of John Craig, kind of slumped forward, and all I could see was blood. We were flying, this is in a Piper Cub, and fortunately for both of us, the Piper Cub has 2 areas from which you can fly the plane, although I was not a pilot. They have a joystick, they have foot pedals for the controls, and they have an on and off switch for the engine, and they have a stabilizer control and so forth. I called on the radio to our headquarters and said, I know my pilot's been hit, and I don't know whether he's alive or dead. And they said, bail out. Well, I couldn't bail out for 2 reasons. Number 1, I couldn't get out the door because the pilot was slumped against it. Number 2, I had a parachute on and I couldn't get out, couldn't get loose. And number 3, I really didn't want to leave him there. And number 4, we were too close to the ground. I could see the airfield from where we were. I used whatever information that I had gained from watching him and from being in the back seat and so forth. I flew the airplane as close to the airfield as I could. On the approach, what I did was I cranked what they called the stabilizer down, so the plane, instead of flying like this, was flying like this. And I gently eased it down and basically flew the plane into the ground. Hit tail first, bounced 3 or 4 times, stopped. And what happened was then an ambulance was already there waiting. They got John out of the plane, found out that he had been hit by a fairly large caliber bullet that went through his leg, bounced off his head, and he was out of it. That's what you call a memorable experience, okay?
And was that the end of your war?
No.
Is there a lot more to?
Yeah, there's a lot more. I can't go through the whole thing.
I understand.
Number 1, I don't remember it.
The ones that you feel that are the most important.
And I would say that along the Moselle River, we were just outside of a town called Metz, which was surrounded by 7 large fortresses. The two biggest ones were a fort called Fort Driant and one called Jeanne d'Arc, or Joan of Arc, or whatever it was called. And we found out very quickly that we were not going to be able to take those by force, but we had to get around them one way or another. So what we did was we kept calling fire missions on the forts to keep them under control, to make sure that they were not in a position of observing our troops and so forth. In November, we started across the Moselle River. I was again now back with the infantry as a forward observer, again with what they called the assault platoon. We crossed the river under not heavy fire, but some fire. Then had to get up to a ridge line that was on the other side of the river that was at that point occupied by German troops. We called in all kinds of artillery fire, and after about 2 or 2.5 days of combat, we were able to get up to halfway up to the ridge line. In part of this attack, the platoon leader was killed. And I was the only officer around there. One of the sergeants came up and said, "What do we do now?" And I said, "Well, we keep doing whatever we can do." He said, can you help us?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "I can direct artillery fire," which I did. My section and I were as busy as we could trying to find targets of opportunity. We were calling for help from the Piper Cubs. We finally, after 2 days, as I recall, finally got to the top of the ridge line and started down on the other side. We were then told that there were sounds of enemy tanks coming out of a wood area, maybe a half a mile in front of us, supported by German infantry. Without going through all the details, I got in touch with the company commander, the infantry company commander of Company G, as I recall, and asked him if the cannon company was in any position to come up and help us. The cannon company consisted of what they called short-barreled 105mm guns. They're towed by a jeep, and in an emergency they can be manhandled into place. We got the cannon companies, 2 of them or 3 of them, as I recall, 2 of the field pieces up into position, but not yet over the ridge line. From where we were, we could see now 3 tanks and German infantry coming, and they were still maybe a half mile away from us. We took them under fire, and they still kept coming. They got to wherever our infantry front lines were, which were probably 300 yards ahead of where we were at that point in time. And found out that what they were doing was overrunning our front lines. So what we did was we knew that number one, the cannon companies were not going to be able to stop the tanks by direct hits. The only thing they were going to be able to do, if we were lucky, would be to hit the track of the tank, which would immobilize it. But in order to do that, we had to get the guns up over the ridge so they could take the tanks under direct fire, which we did. We got 3 of them up in line. I went to one, and my sergeant, who was a fellow by the name of Brailsford, went to the other, and asked the gunners if they had ever fired direct fire. And they said yes, and we said, now don't shoot at the front of the tank, see if you can hit the track. Within a short space of time, they took under fire the first tank, and they did hit the track. When you hit one track, the other one keeps going, the tank spins around. Then I asked the bazooka team to go over on the other side and see if they could hit the rear of the tank, which they did. The rear of the tank is nowhere as near as highly armored as the front. So they hit the tank in the rear. 2 of the German soldiers came out, started to run away, and they were taken under fire and killed. Sergeant Brailsford then went to the other gun, did the same thing with the other tank. The 3rd tank turned around and left. We had called for what they called air bursts, which is an artillery shell that bursts in the air, and the shrapnel goes all over. And that essentially took care of the German infantry. With that being done, now we started on a forward mission with the infantry. The casualties were heavy on both sides. The one thing I remember, which we don't talk about too much, but since you asked about all the experiences, we had some casualties, and 2 of our 8 men who wear a helmet with a big red cross on the front and the back went out to take care of our wounded. 2 German soldiers took them under fire and killed them. And then they came out of their holes with their hands up. Without any thought, about 15 of us took them under fire and killed them. That's a point in time where there's no rational explanation except anger. That's that part of it.
Can you describe this honor that you got from the French military?
That was given to all the members of the 2nd Ranger Battalion for their action on D-Day. And if anybody reads French, you can explain it to me. I can make out a little bit of it, but I can't read French. So I know that it's for the efforts that we expended on D-Day.
Were you able to stay in touch with your family while in the war?
Not really. We had what they called V-mail, which was a little sheet of paper about this size that you wrote a letter on, and it was photographed and sent in a little thing, and when you got the big sheet of paper, it was about this big. And that was how you sent mail from Europe to the States. And my mother had passed away while I was still in the States, so I really had no immediate family. you're not interested in hearing about all the girls I wrote to and so forth and so on.
Can you describe what the food was like there? Did you enjoy
It was
it?
pretty bad. In Ireland, we had green vegetables 3 times a day: broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower. When I tell you, if you ever had scrambled eggs and broccoli,
Never.
we had it.
Should I try it?
No, don't. And to this day, I have trouble eating that food. But in combat, you don't get that kind of food. You have what they call K rations or C rations. K ration comes in a little box, and it's got a can of food, which could be either breakfast, you got scrambled eggs and ham. For lunch, you got pork and something else, maybe some lemonade and coffee, and 3 cigarettes. And that was in a K ration. Then they had what they call an emergency ration, which is a chocolate bar that you needed a hammer to break. Oh, I'm serious. Most of us used a bayonet or something to try and break off pieces. And what you did best was take a small piece and keep it in your mouth until it melted, because if you tried to chew it, you'd break a tooth.
What did you guys do? Like, was there any downtime or not so much?
We had no downtime from when we landed in July until I was wounded again in November.
How would you describe an average day? Wake up around what time?
No such thing as an average day, really. Sure, when I was flying, when I was an air observer, you'd get up in the morning, you'd go over to the airfield. You were living in tents. You go over to the airfield, you'd fly a mission in the morning, you'd fly a mission in the afternoon. You either had targets of opportunity or you didn't, and that was the day. Back with the infantry as a forward observer, you never knew what was going to happen. The morning could start at 3 o'clock in the morning, or it could start at 7 o'clock in the morning. You slept wherever you could and however you could, whether you were digging a hole, a foxhole, whether you were in the back of a trunk, whether you were underneath a truck, or whatever. It was either walking or riding, and then getting off and going after an objective.
Can you recall the day that your service ended? Was it a specific day where you were told, all right, we're going home now?
No. It starts way before then. In November, I was with my section coming down a railroad track, and to this day, I'm not sure that I heard the noise, but there was a loud explosion. I was blown into the air, came down across a railroad track. This is what I was told, because I didn't know it at that time. We had been either bracketed by 2 large shells, or there were 2 mines that were on either side of the track. With the exception of Sergeant Brelford, my entire section was killed. I was evacuated back to London, and then to Oxford in the hospital, where I spent approximately 3.5 months in the hospital. I had fractured vertebrae, cracked shoulder blade, concussion, so forth. But I'm here today.
And then you returned back to the States?
No, I didn't go back to the States yet.
When you finally did go back to the States,
yes.
Did you go to school, go to college, or?
No, well, no. I had had 2 years of college before I went into service. I got back to the States in September of 1945, and I think 2 days after I landed, the war ended. In fact, I was on a ship coming back when they exploded the 2 atomic bombs in Japan. So I knew that at that time there was probably going to be no more war. I got out of service in in September, and I was on what they call terminal leave until December.
Did you maintain any close relationships with friends when you arrived back in the United States?
Oh, yes.
Did you send, like, how often do you still keep in touch with them, or?
The last one died last week.
Ooh, I'm sorry.
No, listen, I'm the survivor. We started calling all the people that I used to know. Half of them were home already, some of them weren't home, and so forth and so on. Started calling all my old girlfriends and found out most of them were married or engaged and so forth. But I did go out with one who introduced me to a young lady who lived next door to her, who ended up being my wife.
Did you happen to join any veterans organizations after the war?
No.
What did you do after the war for a career?
I went into the lighting business. First of all, I went into the cultured pearl business, which is a family business. But it was a business that was owned by my uncle, and we had a stormy relationship. Every other Friday I would quit, and every other Friday I would be fired. So that lasted for not too long. And then I got a job with a company called Lightalier, who was a manufacturer of commercial and residential lighting. And that's where I spent my career.
How did your military experience influence your life?
I would say it changed me from a young man, a young boy, who was immortal, to a man who said that you don't know what's going to happen next, and you live each day the best way you can, and when tomorrow comes, you do the same thing all over again.
Do you have any other information or facts that you would like to share with us? Or that pretty much sums up your war experience?
Well, I would say that when you first go into the Army, as a young man, you are immortal. And then you figure out once your turn is coming next.
Alright. I think that just about does it for today.
Very good.
Alright. Thanks.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.